Welcome to Night Light. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. So glad you could join me today. I have a special lady with me. Before I get into the show, though, I want to thank Ken Quiet Hawk, as always, for his amazing voice in the intro. He is a native storyteller, and he and his wife have lots of CDs, so do check him out on the Internet. Listen to the voice tell stories of how one culture, preserved their history and cosmology in a way that is far better than books, I think. I have with me today an old friend. Actually, I've known her for a very long time. We don't talk too often, but I have known her for years and years. And Susan Shumsky is with us, and she has written an amazing book. And I must tell you, it is probably one of the best book on the Beatles that I have ever read, and I've read a couple. And it's actually an upfront and personal, she was in the front lines type, and she had a way of observing them almost. I don't think she was same time, same place, but she was in the same area and the same generation and the same period of time frame as they were. So her explanation and her way of portraying those times and that culture and that way of life is really very, very profound. The name of the book is The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles. And it portrays the spiritual journey of the Beatles and of that entire generation of visionaries in the 60s who transformed the world. The Inner Light illumines hidden meanings of the Beatles' India-influenced lyrics and sounds. And she decoded, she is a unique person. She was a rare insider who spent 2 decades in the ashrams and 6 years on the personal staff of the Beatles' mentor, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. This eye-opening book draws back the curtain on the Beatles' experiments with psychedelics, meditation, chanting, and Indian music. And among many shocking revelations, we discover who invented raga rock, not the Beatles, the real identity of rare Indian instruments and musicians on their tracks, which of the Beatles was the best meditator, not George, why the Beatles left India in a huff, and John and George's attempts to return, Maharishi's accurate prediction, and who Sexy Sadie, Jojo, Bungalow Bill, Dear Prudence, Blackbird, My Sweet Lord, Hare Krishna, and the Fool on the Hill really were. Half a century later, the Beatles have sold more records than any other recording artist. A new generation wants to relive the magic of the flower power era and is now discovering the message of this iconic band and its 4 superstars. For people of all nations and ages, the Beatles' mystique lives on. The Inner Light is Susan's gift to their legacy. Susan has authored 20 books in English, released 36 foreign editions, won 43 book awards, and done 1,300 media appearances. A rare insider, she was on the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's personal staff for 6 years and lived in his ashrams for 20 years. That's something I really want to talk to her about. I just, oh, well, wait, let me bring, hi, Susan, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here with you today, Barbara. I'm so excited.
I am too. I mean, you know, I've known you for a long time. I've known about your background, most of it, but not the 20 years in ashrams and being on the personal staff of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. That's such an incredible opportunity to share in that kind of an environment and atmosphere. We'll get to your book, but what drew you into this modality, this spiritual journey that you were on, and living in the ashrams for 20 years? That's a lot. That's a lot of commitment. What was that like?
Yeah. So what drew me there was the times. At that time, we were flower children. We were protesting the war. We were seeking higher consciousness. It wasn't just all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the hippie generation. It was about experiencing nirvana. Uh-huh. And our gurus at that time were Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass. And they were telling us to turn on, tune in, and drop out. They wrote a book called The Psychedelic Experience, which was a translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, basically. And it was a handbook for taking acid. They claimed that you could reach nirvana that way. So that's what we were trying, that's what I and many other people of that generation, including the Beatles, were trying to do. And we thought we could get there through LSD, but some of us found out that was not the way. At least for me, it was a disaster. But I still wanted to reach nirvana. So I was reading a lot of books like Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, which seemed to be the primer of the time. Everyone read that book.
Oh,
and and then there was the Buddhist scriptures. I was reading that. I was reading The Way of Zen and other works by Alan Watts. And in his books, he said that you have to find a meditation guide. Well, in the mid-19th century, you didn't exactly go to the yellow pages and look up meditation guide or anything remotely similar to that. So I asked a friend, how do I find this meditation guide? And he said, well, have you ever tried to meditate on your own? I said, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. You know, I didn't know what I was doing. So much so that I lay on my bed. I didn't even know you're supposed to sit up when you meditate, Barbara. I lay on my bed and sort of prayed for or asked for a meditation. And immediately I was propelled into this ecstatic state. I could feel this cord or rush of energy rushing from the tips of my toes all the way to the top of my head. And I felt like I was plugged into this cosmic electric socket, but in a most ecstatic way. And I figured, well, I guess this is meditation. I didn't know any better. Not only had I had my first meditation experience, but also Kundalini awakening all at the same time without any drugs or anything. So that was my first experience. And then I wound up a friend took me to the Transcendental Meditation Center, and the rest is history.
And you ended up in India?
Yes. I had such amazing experiences with TM so quickly that I wanted to become a teacher immediately. So I started applying to courses to go to India. And every time I applied, they said I was too young. You're too young, you're too young. But finally, in 1970, they allowed the younger students to go. That was the fourth time I applied, I think. And including when the Beatles went, I applied to that course as well. I didn't know the Beatles would be there. No one knew, actually. But I applied. But I once again, I was rejected because I was too young. But eventually I went in 1970, and then I spent 6 months there in India with Maharishi, 3 months at the course, and then 3 months afterwards, a few of us hung around with him. It was like a handful of people, and I was one of them. And then later I joined his staff, his international staff. I was on his personal staff for 6 years.
Now, that's, I'm familiar with him to a degree. I'm more familiar with the Hare Krishna group. Is there a difference? I guess there is. I just don't know what it is.
Right. So the Hare Krishna group gained a tremendous amount of popularity around that time, too, especially after George Harrison left Maharishi in a huff and then joined. He didn't really formally join the Hare Krishnas, but he supported them in a lot of different ways, including paying for the rent on their temple that they rented in Bury Place, near Soho there in London, and also paying for this huge, amazing property, Bhaktivedanta Center, in the suburbs of London. And also helping them by recording the Hare Krishna mantra and doing another recording of an entire album of chants, Hare Krishna chants. So he was very close with them, with the Hare Krishnas. He practiced the mantra himself. He was very much into chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. One time when he was on an airplane, he was on a small craft, and the plane got hit 3 times by lightning, and it was one of the engines. I mean, it was a bad scene. I think one of the engines might have gone out. I'm not sure, but he was chanting the Hare Krishna mantra at the top of his lungs during this entire ordeal, and he claims that it saved his life. So he was really into chanting that mantra, and John Lennon also was into that. So the Hare Krishna, yes, it was about chanting a mantra. Specifically the Hare Krishna mantra, which is Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That's it. That's the extent of it. It's a mantra that they chanted. And Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, who was the founder of ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, he's the one that brought this mantra to the West and that founded the Hare Krishna movement throughout the entire world. And amazingly, I think he was about age 70 when he first arrived in the U.S., and he wrote 80 books after that age, and he founded hundreds of temples. He did a tremendous amount in his lifetime.
Actually, when he came over, he had, I think, a heart attack on the ship when he came over, and he just chanted his way through it. And when he arrived here, he had no place to go. He had no one to go to. There he was with his little suitcase, and what happened, his life story and everything is just phenomenal. And these what would you call them? These monks. They are so dedicated to their belief in the divine throughout them that they just know that everything's going to be okay. It's just amazing. And but so and the same thing with Maharishi Mahesh, is that it, Yogi?
Correct.
He was the same way. I mean, there was such a
same thing. He arrived with a bedroll, with a carpet roll, and that was it. He didn't know where he'd go, what he'd do, and etc. So,
I mean, that kind of dedication to a belief is so profound and so pure. It's just unbelievable. I mean, they're human too, but But for the most part, they are so dedicated to that belief that I can see how. And the one that you were with and on the staff for, he was the laughing yogi, right? He was always laughing.
Yeah, he was dubbed the giggling guru by the press because he was always giggling. He was always laughing. Yeah. Probably
thought we were all. Right. I mean, when you stop and think, coming from that kind of an atmosphere into what everyday reality is for us, it is kind of funny how we stress out over stupidity, and we are enslaved by credit cards and money, and they just celebrate life and joy, and they get away with it. I mean, not get away with it. I mean, he didn't have whole bunches of money piled someplace, but
right.
It was fascinating. So, at some point, the Beatles got involved with this. Well, let's go back to the beginning. I mean, they got together,
right?
And they were was it Germany? They got they made their bones. They slept in back rooms and for very little money
yeah. Yes.
They
That's right.
Washed in the urinals.
Slaved away for a long time, and then eventually they became quite popular in Liverpool at the Cavern Club. They appeared there 292 times at the Cavern Club, and but their fame increased when they went to Germany and played there. So in any case, the Beatles became famous. I don't think that's really the topic of our conversation today. But yes, they became famous. They've sold more records than any band, than any musical artist that has ever lived. And they were together for 8 years. So,
I think one of the things about your book that I am so impressed with. You didn't just write the story. You put links in it so that if people wanted to scan the link, they could listen to the music, or they could see the video, or they could see your book has so many of those links in it. And
yeah, it has.
Unfortunately, I read the book on my Kindle, and I couldn't do that, which is just as well, because if I could have, I'd still be reading your book. There were so many.
Yes, the book has 130 QR codes, and it has 170 very rare photos. So that's what Barbara's referring to when she says links. It has 130 QR codes in it. So you can go to videos, you can go to lyrics, you can go to audios. There's just so much material that is pointing to from the book.
That was a labor of love for sure. I mean, was there something about this that you? I mean, I know what it's like to have a need to do something, to be literally driven to write something. Is that what happened with this? I mean, this is so obviously, so totally researched, so totally with material and everything else in it. This is not just a book. This is a tribute, and it's so beautifully done.
Yeah, it also has it has 950 endnotes. So obviously it's very well researched. So yes, this was an obsession in a way, simply because, so I wrote my memoir. My memoir was Maharishi and Me, Seeking Enlightenment with the Beatles Guru. And that was all about my journey with Maharishi. And also it had information about many of the celebrities that came while I was there, that came to visit Maharishi and were devotees of Maharishi, including Donovan, Paul Horn, Doug Henning, Alan Kaufman,
Yeah, there were some names there that I was surprised.
Yeah, and Deepak Chopra and John Gray and so many really famous people. Andy Kaufman is the name of the comedian, not Alan. Andy Kaufman, who was in Taxi. So many of these famous people who would show up. Mike Love, the lead singer of the Beach Boys, and other Beach Boys as well, the Doors, that were really into transcendental meditation. So I wrote about them in my memoir. But then the story of the Beatles was so huge, I couldn't possibly fit it into the memoir. I could only do like a couple chapters about the Beatles. So I said to myself, I really want to tell the whole story about the Beatles. I want to tell the whole thing of how they were influenced by India, of what really happened when they were in Rishikesh, which no one has ever told the whole story until now. And so I wanted to just write a complete tell-all, and I told it through the songs. So each chapter is a song. So I only included the songs that had an Indian influence or a highly spiritual influence, an influence of either psychedelics or an influence of Indian philosophy, of Indian music, Indian musicians, and Indian musical instruments. Anything that really was the theme of Indian philosophy, I included in this book. And I explained the lyrics. I explained what instruments were being used when they were Indian instruments. And also I researched and found the Indian musicians, which really those were very difficult to find. And I also was able to interview some of them, the Indian musicians that were with the Beatles or with George Harrison in his solo career. So, and because of my background in Indian philosophy, I was able to interpret the lyrics according to what really was intended by George Harrison or by John Lennon or by Paul.
Who was it that did? I don't know if it was the first one, but I mean I actually recognize the song. That was Norwegian Wood. Is that the first time that they used an instrument, or was that just one of the many?
Norwegian Wood was the first time that the Beatles used an Indian instrument in one of their songs, and it was a sitar that George used. He found out about the sitar when they were filming Help, the film Help. The film Help has an Indian theme. It uses Indian music in the soundtrack. The soundtrack was made by Indian musicians. And there was also in the soundtrack of Help, there was a medley of Beatles songs that was played by Indian instruments, very brief medley. And that was played during a scene that was supposed to be the Raja Rama restaurant scene in Help. And the theme of the film, like I said, is Indian theme. The film was about thuggies. Thuggies were these itinerant murderers and thieves who lived in the 18th and 19th century that would they were con jobs. They would con travelers and get their money from them, and then they would murder them. They'd chop them into pieces, actually. So they were these horrible, horrible thieves and murderers. And that was what was chasing Ringo throughout the film were these thuggies. And the other thing about the thuggies is that they worshipped Kali. And Kali is a goddess of India. But then in the film, they made her into a mockery. They called her Kahili, and they made this huge statue of her and had it out on the ocean. And they were all trying to get to Ringo, to sacrifice him, do a blood sacrifice of Ringo. So the whole theme was about thuggies. It was about India, and it had horrible Indian stereotypes in the entire film. It was very, very damning towards Indians. I mean, it really was very inappropriate.
Well,
but it was the 1960s. It wasn't 2023.
Yeah. Is there something about hit the Indian instruments vibrationally that shifts consciousness?
Oh, yes. I mean, Ravi Shankar, who was George Harrison's mentor, who taught him sitar, he explained to George that Indian music, the Indian ragas specifically, that they shift consciousness, that you can attain higher consciousness through playing those instruments and even through listening to the Indian music. It will take you into an altered state of consciousness, into a higher consciousness. And that's if it's done traditionally, not somebody trying to pluck a few notes like Norwegian would. I mean, Ravi Shankar was really not in favor of the way that Western musicians were trying to pluck the sitar. He likened it to as if a person would pick up a violin and pluck it or try to use a bow on it and say, do you like this sound? He felt the same way about it. It was a very discordant sound to Ravi Shankar to hear George Harrison plucking the sitar in Norwegian wood. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I think it to me it was fascinating just how involved they got in the Indian music and the Indian instruments, and it just
very much
seemed
so.
It just seemed almost as though playing the instrument was a form of prayer, and that's how it felt as I was reading your book, that the people who were that were artists on the different instruments, it felt as though that it was a prayer, and you have to do it right, and it's a lifetime's practice.
It is, yeah. So, Ravi Shankar said himself, even though he was a master of the sitar, he claimed that he didn't know how to play it, even though he'd been practicing it for 15 years or 20 years or however long he had been doing it by that time, probably more like 25 years, that he actually what he told George that you will not even begin to master the sitar until you've been playing it for 25 years. So
it felt like in the book anyhow, and I did read the other book on Here Comes the Sun. That was George Harrison too.
Right.
He was really very, very into the music. It captured him.
Very
and
much
I'm not
so.
sure that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it captured the others as well. I don't think it captured Ringo at all, but they all kind of went along with it, and it. But I was fascinated. I actually went and listened to a whole bunch of Indian music, and I did feel as though there was an energy there that you don't feel with a lot of music that's on the radio and stuff like that today. You just don't feel it. And
that's
and
correct.
yet,
yeah.
and so what and when I listened to the Indian music connected to the Beatles, that had a special. I don't know. It kind of created a buzz, I guess is the best way to put it. And
that's how George would put it. That's how George would describe it. Is like a buzz. Yeah, it's interesting you use that phrase because George was saying the same thing. Don't discount Ringo on this though. Ringo did a very interesting. Peace and Love. He did a Peace and Love song where he used the Hindi expression for peace and love, and where he had a tabla player, tabla girl. She's called Tabla Girl, and he invited her to come and play on the record. So it isn't just the other Beatles that are into all this stuff. Ringo is very much into it as well. And as a matter of fact, Maharishi praised Ringo as being the best meditator.
Really?
Maharishi said, and I quote Maharishi here, Maharishi said, Ringo is always in meditation and he goes by feeling and heart. But as for the other Beatles, too much brain is in the way.
Oh,
He said,
okay.
and he said, George, as far as George, that this is his last life, and that he's very highly advanced. And he said about John Lennon, said that John must not give in to his weakness for women, or it will ruin him.
Oh, my. Well, John, I mean, he and Yoko Ono, did they were all for peace, love, and whatever.
They were all for peace and love, but they were also taking heroin.
Well, yeah, that too. that does make a difference.
Yeah.
Now, I just think that it's funny. I think that they were meant to be together for a certain number of years and plant their seeds and then go their separate ways. And, that's certainly what happened. They didn't stay together.
Maharishi told the Beatles when they were in India, Maharishi told the Beatles, and this is another quote from Maharishi, if you do not continue your meditation practice, your group is going to break up.
Well, and they did. I'm just wondering, they weren't of the same mind when they got together. They all kind of, came from the same type of background and stuff like that, and their music did bind them together a great deal. I think that the thing about the Beatles that always impressed me was how, they went from their rock and roll, whatever, and then they started to experiment with all sorts of different things, different ways of doing things. And it was masterful how they stretched themselves. Most artists have a genre and they stick to it, and the Beatles just wouldn't stick anywhere. They kept searching and stretching. And it's amazing. I mean, even today, I think, there's only one or two left. Ringo's still around, and is it
Paul?
Paul
Ringo
is
and
still
Paul.
around. And it's sad. I would have liked to have seen them continue together, but they went such different directions after a while.
Right.
And I guess that's what growing up does. I mean,
Yeah, I guess so.
I've been in contact lately with people that I, grew up with, sort of, and it's like, whoa, I have nothing in common with them anymore.
Exactly.
So it's sort of like, you do grow, and you grow in the directions you're meant to grow in, but while they were together, they created such magic.
That's for sure.
And I don't think at the time they really realized the magic they were creating. They were just, it was a wonderful place for them, actually, because they had so much money, they could do anything they wanted to do, and it was a matter of, finding some place to put this energy and to create. And George, loved gardens. I mean, he was into gardens like crazy.
Yeah, once he got Friar Park, that place that he got from Crisp, a guy named Crisp. Yeah, he was a gardener, he became a gardener. As a matter of fact, his son Danny didn't even realize that his father was famous or anything. He just thought of him as being a gardener.
Oh, that's
young
so cool.
Baby. Danny, yeah. And then later he found out, I guess he's this famous Beatle.
Now, did they become vegetarians, or I couldn't figure it out?
Paul became a vegetarian because of Heather, because of his wife. And George became a vegetarian because he was into Eastern philosophy, and Maharishi was a proponent of vegetarianism, and so was Bhaktivedanta. And so the spiritual path that George was on, yes, he became a vegetarian as well. I'm not sure if I think John and Yoko also were vegetarians. I don't know about Ringo, probably not.
So what is
but
the
he might
philosophy?
be a vegetarian now. Ringo's probably vegan now because he got into this super healthy lifestyle. Once he was more elderly, he became, he's really into keeping fit. So I think he does yoga, asanas, and he probably is a vegetarian now too, imagine. And
the philosophy of vegetarianism and not eating meat and stuff like that, is that a spiritual concept, or is it a health concept?
I think it's different for different individuals. I think some people do it for reasons of health, and other people do it for reasons of philosophy.
It just, to me, they went through such changes in their life. I mean, it was just, but of course, it was the 60s and the 70s, and that was a time of great upheaval in lots of ways. But their music is just so phenomenal. I love one of my favorites is Norwegian Wood, but there are a couple of other ones that the My Sweet Lord is another favorite of mine. I mean,
so My Sweet Lord was. So that particular song was one that George wrote. What he wanted to do is he wanted to do an Indian chant, but he thought if rather than doing a chant to Lord Krishna, who is the god that George worshipped, the Hindu deity Lord Krishna, that he wanted to also bring in Christians. He wanted Christians to also chant the Hare Krishna mantra. So what he did was he decided he would, that when he composed the song, that it would be Hare Krishna, that they would be chanting Hare Krishna before they even realized what they were doing. So, and he included in that not only Hare Krishna, but he also included Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha, which is from the Guru Gita. That was also in that song. And that was the chant that transcendental meditation teachers chant whenever they teach someone to practice TM. So that is part of what we call the puja ceremony. And that was a chant that George included in that. And so he also sang My Sweet Lord, My Sweet Lord. And so Christians would be singing that, thinking of Jesus, thinking of Christ when they were singing My Sweet Lord, My Sweet Lord. And if you ask the general population who is My Sweet Lord, they'll say, oh, that's Jesus. Wasn't Jesus at all, though. Or it could also be Jesus, because George loved and respected and worshipped Christ. He worshipped Jesus Christ. He also worshipped Lord Krishna, though. So that song is both Jesus and Lord Krishna that he's talking about.
Now, when they went to spend time at an ashram, for those people who don't know what an ashram is, let's give a little explanation as to what an ashram is.
Yeah, so they went to Rishikesh, where Maharishi had his ashram, and an ashram is a place where you go to study with a spiritual master from India. It's a residential facility, very primitive usually. It might have little huts or little bungalows, little barracks. And the one in Rishikesh was where the Beatles went to. They've renamed that now, Beatles Ashram. They call it the Beatles Ashram now. But it was a place that we went to when we studied with Maharishi and became teachers of transcendental meditation. And that particular place was built on a cliff overlooking the Ganges, about 150 feet up this cliff. Beautiful setting, and they built a few. It was basically concrete construction. You know, it was concrete barracks, and very primitive. Concrete floor, hot, thin mattress, shelving, a chair, a table. That was it. And the Beatles were given a few other amenities when they were there because they were celebrities. They were given some other amenities, but not really very much. Just better beds, you know, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And also they had indoor plumbing. They had bathrooms attached, ensuite bathrooms, whereas our toilets were outside and our wash basins were outside and our showers were outside. So we had to go outside to wash and bathe and go to the bathroom. But so the Beatles had a little bit of an upgrade there in their barracks, but certainly the barracks themselves weren't any better. They were just these concrete bungalows.
But, you know, I would think it gave them a great deal of privacy and peace because they probably weren't swamped for autographs and stuff like that.
Correct.
I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to live in Westport.
Actually, the people that were...
Go ahead.
The people that were there with the Beatles in India who were taking that teacher training course, most of them were elderly people. They barely even knew who the Beatles were. So it was no big deal for them to have the Beatles around. They didn't care.
Well, yeah, I used to live in, Westport, Connecticut, and Paul Newman lived there. And, you know, nobody really, you know, flipped out over him. Actually, I did meet him once kind of and called him a jerk. There was a cheese shop, and and I was leaning over to get something out of one of the freezers, and I got bumped and I got knocked into it, and I turned around because the guy had knocked me into it, and he helped me out, and he said, "I'm terribly sorry." I said, "You are a jerk," and it was Paul Newman, and he said, "Geez, nobody's called me that in a long time." And I realized who it was, and I said, "Well, then I'll be memorable, but you were a jerk." And he apologized. And then, you know, I wanted to get an autograph or something, and all I had was some brie in my hand, and there was no way I was going to ask him to sign my brie. So, but
sign my brie.
Yeah. But you know, it's kind of like he lived there. He was one of the natives, and it was, you know, it wasn't a big deal because Paul Newman lived there, and it was, you know, yeah, it's Paul Newman.
Yeah. Right.
Not that you go up and talk to him or anything like that, but you also don't, you know, you don't get into his face, I guess. So they had that luxury of being treated like everybody else to a great degree. And they had the freedom to walk around without screaming people coming in their faces and things like that. So I would think that was probably one of the few places they could go where they were treated sort of normally.
Exactly, yeah. Although Maharishi would fawn over them. That's the problem. Maharishi would always fawn over celebrities. He was a little bit of a sycophant in a way. At least Mia Farrow thought he was. So, that was another one of the celebrities that was there, Mia Farrow, at the time the Beatles were there. And so was Mike Love, and so was Paul Harn and a few others. So, they Maharishi, when the Beatles first arrived in Rishikesh, he offered them that they would have their own dining room, and they said, "Oh, no, we'll eat with the other people." So they would just eat outside in the dining area with the other students there. So they were commingling with the students, and there was no big deal. No big deal was made out of them.
Well, I think when you're in that kind of environment, there's a whole different atmosphere. It's sort of like, I'm here to study. I'm here to learn how to be a teacher. I'm here to, spiritually adjust myself to a different element, and so, you're not going, oh wow, it's a Beatle.
Right.
I would have flunked that, but and the pictures show them as disheveled and as dirty and as relaxed and as casual as anybody, so that
right.
you probably, in some of those pictures, I didn't recognize the Beatles.
Yeah.
Because they were, hair and beards and everything, and even though I, knew of the fact that they if you gave me a picture and said, pick the Beatles out, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So, but it just, what a great place, however, to be creative.
They actually composed about 40 songs while they were there in India, and many of their songs went on to the White Album, otherwise known as The Beatles. The name of the album was The Beatles, actually. The nickname of the album is The White Album. So many of the songs were written there, including Dear Prudence, Mother Nature's Son, Your Blues, I'm So Tired, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey, Revolution, Continuing Story of Bungalow Bill, Sexy Sadie.
Okay, so wait.
Why Don't We Do It in the Road, Blackbird.
You're throwing around a lot of names. Who were these people? Because they weren't making up they were making up the name, but it represented a person. So who was Sexy Sadie and Jojo and Bungalow Bill and Dear Prudence? Who were these people? Mm-hmm. Were they honoring them, or were they making fun of them?
Sometimes honoring, sometimes making fun. Dear Prudence, honoring. That was Prudence Farrow, Mia Farrow's sister. Bungalow Bill, criticizing, making fun of. The guy who shot the tiger. Is Bungalow Bill, and his name is Rick Cook. He was the son of Nancy Cook de Herrera. She was there taking the course, and she was a socialite from Los Angeles who was helping out Maharishi with publicity. She was Maharishi's publicist also. And her son came to visit while she was taking the course there in Rishikesh. And he didn't come there to meditate or to take the course. He came there to kill tigers. He came there with his gun. Yeah. And he and his mom went out on safari. Okay, if you go on safari these days, you go in a Jeep and you look at the animals. But back then, if you go on safari, you go to kill animals and to take home taxidermy trophies from India. So, as Lenin said, this is a quote from Lenin, there was a guy who took a short break to go away and shoot a few poor tigers and then come back to commune with God. So what happened was they went out on a tiger hunt, him and his mom, and they went out on elephants. The elephants drove the tigers into the kill zone. It was actually very expensive to go on one of these hunts. And then they went up onto a machan, which is a platform in a tree, and they saw the tiger, and they killed the tiger. And then after they were done doing that, they went back to the ashram, and the first place they went to was Maharishi's bungalow, so they could brag about their exploits of killing a tiger. To Maharishi, who was a vegetarian Hindu, yogi, as if he would be interested in a tiger kill. So as Nancy, as the mom, Nancy, was describing the tiger kill in great detail to Maharishi, he was glaring at her. And Rick could tell that he was not very impressed and that he was very upset about it. So Rick said, well, was it a sin, for me to kill a tiger? And Maharishi said, well, will you ever kill one again? And he said, I don't think I ever will. And in fact, Rick never did. After that happened in India, he became a vegetarian. He became a photographer who took pictures of animals for National Geographic, and he never shot another tiger. So the lyrics explain in great detail this tiger hunt. It says in the lyrics, hey, Bungalow Bill, what did you kill? And then it says he went out tiger hunting with his elephant and gun. In case of accidents, he always took his mom. He's the all-American bullet-headed Saxon mother's son. And then, and one thing also that happened when they were talking to Maharishi about the tiger hunt is that John Lennon piped in the middle of it, and he said, well, isn't that rather life-destructive? And that was a phrase that Maharishi used to always use, like life-destructive, life-damaging, life-destructive, life-supporting, life-supportive. He would talk about actions as either being life-destructive or life-supporting actions. So you could tell that how influenced John Lennon was by Maharishi, or he wouldn't be using one of Maharishi's catchphrases. And then also in the middle of it, Nancy, the mom, was trying to defend herself. And she said, well, Maharishi, it was either the tiger or us, which was ridiculous. Yeah, right. So let me continue with the lyrics here for a minute. It says, deep in the jungle where the mighty tiger lies, Bill and his elephants were taken by surprise. So Captain Marvel zapped in right between the eyes. By the way, that's where they killed the tiger, right between the eyes. The children, okay, here it goes on. The children asked him if to kill was not a sin. Not when he looked so fierce, his mother butted in. If looks could kill, it would have been us instead of him. All the children sing, hey, Bungalow Bill, what did you kill? So that described in great detail everything that happened that day with the Bungalow Bill kill and what happened with the tiger and the mother and what she said. Not when he looked so fierce, his mother butted in.
Oh, wow.
Because she said it was either the tiger or us.
Now, was it Prudence that had the issue with Maharishi, or was it her sister?
Mia. Sister Mia. Prudence was very devoted to meditation. She had learned meditation a couple years previously, and so as soon as she got to the ashram, she went in her room and didn't ever want to come out. She just wanted to meditate all the time. She was completely obsessed with it. And in fact, Prudence, because of the fact that she had been taking drugs and alcohol, and she was an alcoholic and she was a drug addict, and she was really a mess when she was a teenager. She had a psychotic breakdown. She had actually been in a mental institution for a while before she went to India. And unfortunately, when she was in India and she was just meditating day and night, she actually had another psychotic episode in India, which was really very dramatic. And they had to, in fact, they had to have guards guarding her door day and night. And Maharishi, before that happened, Maharishi asked John and George to just kind of look in on her. He put them in a discussion group together. He asked them to sort of take care of her. And and they wrote that song, Dear Prudence, Won't You Come Out to Play? Because they couldn't get her to come out of her room, you see. She was like in a catatonic state. And all the Beatles tried to persuade her to come out of her room, and she wouldn't. And so they composed this song, or John composed a song. Won't you come out to play, greet the brand new day, the sun is up, the sky is blue, it's beautiful, and so are you. Open up your eyes, see the sunny skies, the wind is low, the birds will sing that you are part of everything. Dear Prudence, won't you open up your eyes, look around, round, round. Let me see you smile like a little child. The clouds will be a daisy chain, let me see you smile again. Dear Prudence, won't you let me see you smile? So he composed that song about her state, that she wouldn't open up her eyes, even though they were trying to persuade her. And she never heard them sing that song. They the legend is that they sang that song to her in India, but they never did. What they did is they burst into her room and they sang Obla Di Obla Da, and they sang Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But they never sang that specific song to her. But as George was leaving India in a huff with John, George passed her a note that said that John had written a song about her. And about a year later, her mom, Maureen O'Sullivan, the famous actress, she played the song for Prudence, and Prudence really loved it. She had trepidation when she heard that John had written a song about her. She was afraid that it would make fun of her. But in fact, she loved the song. She thought it was very sweet. So that was a happy thing. And in fact, Prudence had a happy ending too. She became what happened was they took her to Maharishi's bungalow every day for the remainder of the time that she was there in India. And he did something with her. He healed her. And by the end of the course, she was great. She was having lunch with everyone, talking to everyone, joking around, just completely different, her total personality reversal. Suddenly she was in great health, physical, mental, everything kind of health, and has been ever since. And in fact, she is a Sanskrit scholar. She's a yoga teacher. She has a lovely family. She's married to a lovely guy that I knew her and her husband. And she had a happy ending. What can I say? It was good. Mia Farrow is the one that Maharishi. Her sister Mia is the one that Maharishi made a pass at, not Prudence.
Okay. Well, I almost every spiritual guru at one point in time or another has had a moment of being human, and I think they're almost crucified for it. I mean, I'm not saying it's right, but I do think that people they're here like all the rest of us to learn to grow, to be human, to spread love, joy, and whatever. But they all have slips. I mean, that's of course if I worshipped somebody, literally worshipped somebody, and they suddenly made a pass at me, I think I would be disillusioned, and I think that's why. But in looking back at it, I'm thinking, oh, come on, But I guess that they looked upon him as so pure and so holy that making a pass was the worst thing in the world he could do, aside from, eating a rare hamburger and smoking. Rare hamburger really sounds good.
Beatles had great expectations. What can you say? They were that character from Dickens. Yeah, they had high expectations of Maharishi, very unrealistic expectations. And as a result of that, they got heavily disillusioned when he did not meet their expectations. So John and George, who stayed the longest in India, got disillusioned, and they left in a big huff. Ringo and Paul were long gone by that time. Ringo stayed for about a week there. He didn't stay very long mainly because he had a 6-month-old child at home. And his wife was with him. His wife was there with him, and she hated the bugs in India. She couldn't stand the bugs. There was a legend that one fly kept her hostage for hours until Ringo could return to the bungalow and kill it. But, there were centipedes, there were millipedes, there were scorpions, there was all kinds of things in the jungle. It's a jungle. And she didn't like the bugs, and he couldn't handle the food. Ringo had brought an entire suitcase of Heinz beans with him so that he'd have something to eat. But even then, he had a whole suitcase of Heinz beans, at least that's what he claimed. So, he couldn't handle the food. He had peritonitis as a child. So that didn't work out very well for them. They only stayed about a week. And then Paul left after about a month. he was there with Jane Asher, and Jane Asher had a theatrical commitment. She was an actress back in London, so they had to leave. They left after about a month. And then John and George stayed for 2 months. And they left in a huff on April 10th.
Yeah, and I think, I forget whose comment it was, but, I know a past when I see one, It was like,
that was Mia.
Yeah.
I know a pass from a puja. I know the difference between a pass and a puja. That was Mia. And also she said another time, I know a pass when I see one. And then she told Ned Wynn. Ned Wynn was one of my lovers, actually. He was the Ed Wynn's grandson and Keenan Wynn's son. These are old-time actors, in case, you all don't know who that is. But
I know
Ned
who you're talking
was a screenwriter, and he was my lover. And when Mia came back from India, she immediately contacted Ned because they were childhood friends, and Ned was one of Maharishi's disciples. And so she contacted Ned, and she said, this is what happened, and Ned didn't believe her. None of us believed it. We didn't believe it that would have happened. And Ned didn't believe her, and she said, Ned, don't you think I know when a man wants to F me? Don't you think I know? And so that kind of took him aback. And eventually he found out that she was telling the truth. And the reason he found out is because the other women who came back from being with Maharishi came to see Ned, specifically Judith Bork, who wrote the book Robes of Silk, Feet of Clay. That was the book that Judith wrote about her love affair with Maharishi. And then there was another woman who I hesitate to give her real name because she doesn't want people to know who she is. And she came back and told Ned and gave him all the nitty-gritty details of her love affair that she had with Maharishi. And then finally Neil believed them, when there were already three women at that point. And, I personally know of 15 different women that Maharishi either made a pass at or had sex with. So there were a lot of women, and one of them was Teresa Olsen, and she has now finally come out of the closet and told me I should and could use her name. I've been keeping her secret for decades. Teresa Olsen was a legend. She's a legend in the TM organization. She was a child when Maharishi first came to the United States and stayed in their home, her childhood home. And her mom, Helena Olsen, wrote a book called Hermit in the House. And Teresa, when Maharishi was with them, he made a pass at her, more than a pass. It was, I wouldn't even say what happened over the airwaves. I couldn't possibly tell the full story in this podcast. But
no.
Yes, he made a pass at Teresa, and she was age 19 at the time. At least there's no underage people that I know of that Maharishi made a pass at. But it was very highly inappropriate what she did with Teresa. So in any case, yes, he made a pass at various women. Linda Pierce is another one who came out and told her story. She had an affair with Maharishi while she was in India. And in fact, she came up to me one day and told me about it.
Wow.
Those are just a few.
Well, it's just another part of being human.
Yes.
When you think of what is expected of them,
right?
Nobody, you put somebody on a pedestal high enough, they're going to fall off.
Exactly.
And they do. But you can't. I don't think you can blame them for being human. I mean,
not really.
So okay. So they left in a huff, and
Yeah, and just to address what you just said, when they came back, John said to Paul, Paul said, well, why'd you leave? What happened? And John said, well, he was making a pass at the girl from, she was a girl from Brooklyn. And he said he made a pass at the Mia Farrow look-alike, this girl, and her name is Rosalind. So she was the one that Maharishi made a pass at the time the Beatles were there. And so John said that he made a pass at her, and Paul said, so what?
Yeah.
That was it. Paul's answer was, so what? And John said, well, we can't go following that. He's just an old lech like everybody else. So Paul, in other words, he didn't think it was such a big deal. In fact, Paul said, well, was there wasn't any vow of celibacy, or was there? And in fact, Paul didn't realize that actually there was. Paul didn't know that Maharishi claimed himself to be Bal Brahmachari. As a matter of fact, on his passport, which is in my book, there's a picture of his passport right there in my book, The Inner Light. And on the passport, it's signed Bal Brahmachari Mahesh Yogi. Bal Brahmachari means life celibate. Life celibate.
Oh, yeah, well.
So he claimed to be life celibate. And that's the reason why so many of his disciples thought that he was a hypocrite. It's because he claimed himself to be life celibate.
But, he was the messenger. It was the message that was important.
I have to agree with you, Barbara. I agree.
I mean, look at Jesus. There was a messenger that we killed him, but we saved his message.
I know what you're saying.
Humanity doesn't treat messengers too well ever.
Probably not. No.
Of the Beatles, there were 4 of them, and so much music, so much creativity happened. Did they all write music, or was it just a couple of them? And that I mean, where was the creativity evenly distributed? I guess is best way to say it.
Well, as far as creativity, raw creativity, I think it was very, very, very much evenly distributed amongst the Beatles. However, the great songwriting team was Lennon and McCartney, with Paul and John. They were the great songwriters, the genius songwriters of the group. George also wrote some lovely songs. Some of the best songs of the Beatles were written by George as well. For example, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Here Comes the Sun, Something.
Yeah.
Some of those particular ones, especially, are some of the greatest songs ever written. So, in fact, George was also a great songwriter.
Yeah, but his songs you didn't really see his talent until they were broken up, and then you realized that he had the talent.
That's because he had he had been writing songs all along, but they only put one on each album, 1 or 2, And unfortunately, that was a great deal of frustration for George. So when he was finally freed, I mean, he was more than happy that the Beatles split up, because then he was free to go ahead and have an entire solo career. And when those songs started to come out, it was, there were hundreds of them that there was a large backlog of songs that he had written. And then he started making albums, lots of albums. He sold a lot of records.
It seems that large estate that he had was very sparsely, I guess, decorated. I mean, did he keep everything very, very sparse? I don't want to say primitive because an estate that big is not primitive, but it mostly, there were carpets on the floor and stuff like that, and it wasn't, I'd go on a shopping spree, and, with unlimited money. Lord knows what I could have done, but he kept it very simple.
You as his decorator.
Oh my God! I have a friend who was an architect, but she helped to design the one of the palaces in Brunei. And after it was built, they were given a private jet, and they were sent all over the world to buy furniture and horses and everything. And they had someone with them with a checkbook, and they would go to the Waterford factory and buy chandeliers. And, it was. She said it was just the most amazing experience of her life. There was, of course, she wasn't getting anything, but to be able to just, they close the factory down so you can walk through it, and then you pick 15 or 20 of the, things, and then you move on to somewhere else to pick up a racehorse or, So what surprises me really majorly is that they were so young. They earned a tremendous amount of money, and so often, groups like that are mismanaged, and the manager gets most of the money, and they don't get any, and yet they all ended up really wealthy.
Yes. I don't know the details about the business side of the Beatles. I do know that there were some very bad business decisions made, including by Brian Epstein. I do know that their entire catalog of music ended up being owned by Michael Jackson at one point.
Yeah.
I also know that Paul McCartney bought it back. And that's pretty much all I know about the Beatles business. I just am not privy to all that information. You can read about it. There's been many books written about it. But, so yes, there was a lot of mismanagement with the Beatles' money. But yes, they made a decent living. They did well for themselves. They all did well for themselves. But they could have done a lot better. They could have been much more fabulously wealthy. Paul is the only one that ended up with tremendous wealth. He's one of the richest people on earth, but that's because he bought the Beatles catalog back.
Oh yeah.
And he made some other good business decisions because he was being advised by Eastman, who was Linda's father, who founded Kodak. Eastman Kodak.
Yeah, I wondered about that because so many musicians, while they're very famous, they end up having to sing for their supper, and
exactly.
The Beatles didn't have to. The Beatles were able to, go their own way, so to speak, and did. I mean, not Ringo, but John and Yoko, right?
Yeah.
No. Okay. The apartment where they lived was exceedingly expensive, and what they were trying to do, they were out for, and yes, they took stimulants, but they had a their agenda was appropriate. They may not have been, quite so. If they were using heroin and stuff like that, that does kind of put things in question a little bit. But they were out for peace, They really
they had a good message.
More.
They had a wonderful message.
Yeah,
give peace a chance. Mhm. Yeah, they had a wonderful message.
It's really when you see where they were at the height of their career. And they broke up and they all went their separate ways, and they all had different outcomes, and we're still waiting on some, obviously, but but it's sort of like what might have been. You kind of it's sort of like you always wanted to see Sonny and Cher together again.
Yeah.
And same with the Beatles.
Absolutely. People wanted so much for them to get back together. The only time they ever did was up on the roof of Abbey Road, up there on the roof concert, and that was it. Get back. And then they broke up after that, very soon after that.
Did they break up as friends, or did they, kind of, no, I know one of them didn't. Yeah?
I have to say that George was very unhappy about the way he was being treated by Paul McCartney. He got no respect from Paul. And in fact, if you watch the Get Back film, Peter Jackson's film, the 3-hour extravaganza, if you watch his film, or 3-part extravaganza, it's more like 6 hours, you'll see that there's contention between mainly George and Paul, that Paul really does not treat him with respect, and neither does John. John treated he was patronizing towards George, patting him on the head, good little boy, kind of thing.
Wow.
And you do know that we're the Beatles. He's trying to pitch his song "I Me Mine," and John says, and they're making fun of it because it's like a waltz, because it's in 3/4 time. That's the beat. It's a waltz. And they're making fun of it, and well, you do know we're the Beatles, right? I mean, so obviously
they just did.
That song went on to be very big and very popular, but they didn't recognize that. They didn't value George.
I think they got off on being famous, but I don't think they ever realized how iconic they were going to become. I know that I don't know who wrote it for Ringo, but there was a lullaby that they wrote for him that is just the sweetest lullaby ever. And it's, I'll dream a dream for me, you dream a dream for you, and it was a lullaby, and it's a beautiful lullaby. But it's kind of like there was so much magic there. There was so much energy that they were drawing from, and you have to think that, especially when they were in India, the music had to take them to another level of creativity, so that things flowed through them so much easier and so much better than had they been, in England on Abbey Road or in New York City or wherever. It's just a different environment and a different creative energy that was coming out of it all.
Very much so. Paul Horn commented on that, on how they had the time and the space to be most creative in that environment in Rishikesh, where there was no distractions, there was no paparazzi. It was Maharishi really made an environment where their creativity could truly flow. He made sure that all the gates were guarded, no one could get in. The reporters went nuts. They tried so hard to get in, but Maharishi just made sure he actually hired Gurkhas to guard the gates, and he sent the brahmacharis to grab them out of the trees when they were trying to take photos. So that's the reason why the Beatles were left alone and they could thrive. And they would go up on the roof of their bungalow and write songs. When they first got there, Paul started writing songs, and he started talking about the next album. And he was always the business mind, the businessman of the four. And George snapped at him, and he said, we're not effing here to do music, to do the next album. We're here to meditate. And he was all up in arms about it. And then not too long after that, George was found up on the roof of his bungalow with an organ that he brought up there. And he was giving a concert every day to 20-somethings up on the roof. So that was pretty funny. That was ironic. So they
Was
all
that the
ended
harmonium?
up writing lots of music.
Was that the harmonium
there.
they were talking about?
It was actually an organ. It was bigger than a harmonium. It was an organ. There's a picture of it in my book, The Inner Light. And also it's in my other book, Maharishi and Me. I have that same picture in both books of him up on the rooftop playing the organ.
Wow. What a time that
In general,
must have
a
been.
harmonium is usually quite a small instrument. It's just a box on the ground that they play when they're doing bhajans. The organ is bigger than that. But it's also called a harmonium.
Wow. When now, were you ever, actually there present when the Beatles were there too?
No, I never met the Beatles.
Wow. What you think of the whole thing, and I keep thinking of just the creative energy that must have been there. It just must have been.
Yes.
Were you doing anything creative at the time, or were you more into just the meditation and being trained?
Well, interestingly enough, I was on Maharishi's staff, and how I ended up even being on his staff was because I'm an artist, and it was on actually the first time I met Maharishi, I gave him a painting that I had done of him, and I handed the painting to him. And then when I was in India, Maharishi, one night, we were all up on the roof of his bungalow, and we were sitting there in the moonlight, and Maharishi was looking up at the trees, and he used an analogy to talk about higher states of consciousness from the vision of the trees. It looked like gold-tipped trees because the lights on the ashram were shining on the trees. So he was talking about that, and he was using this analogy. And then Jerry Jarvis, who was sitting next to me, he said, somebody should make a painting of that. Hint, hint. He didn't say hint, hint, but that's what he said. He knew I was an artist. So I did. I made a drawing of it, and I showed it to Maharishi. And then he said, oh, what it is, please explain. So I told him about what it was and, that this is what he'd been talking about the night before. And then he said, oh, but there should be people in the, picture. So then I did. I tried to put people in the picture and showed it to him. And then he said, oh, it should be bigger. So I made it bigger. And then I went back to him, and then he said, oh, and I should not be lying down. I should be sitting up. And so I went back and changed it again. And it's all right. So then I went through like 20 incarnations of the picture. And that went on for years. And finally, in 1971, I was pretty much finished this painting. It ended up not just being a picture, but a whole painting with all these pictures. And he says, oh, but I want to recognize everyone. And then I showed it to him, after having tried to figure out what everybody looked like. And then I made all the people look like themselves and went back to him. And then he said, oh, should be a better likeness of so-and-so. And so this went on and on and on and on and on and on. And finally, in about 1971, I had what I thought was finished. And, of course, he criticized it and said it should be this, it should be that. So, but I never really went on anymore with it. But I did put that picture in my book, in my memoir, the book Maharishi and Me, Seeking Enlightenment with the Beatles Guru. That particular picture, that painting that I did, was in that book. But not only did I do that painting, I started on another picture was the Holy Tradition, a picture of all the masters of the Holy Tradition. And so I actually started designing that picture, and I did many, many sketches of that. And Maharishi dubbed me Susan the Artist. He used to call me Susan the Artist. So I did work on that painting, and then I also worked in the art department. I worked on doing graphic design for various publications of the TM organization. And that was one of the jobs I had when I was on the international staff, because I worked in the art department. And I also did illustrations for there was a children's book curriculum for children, and I worked on those illustrations as well.
Who did the cover of your book?
Well, interestingly enough, The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles, the collage on the cover was done by me. I actually created that collage, and I'm very proud of it.
It really is. It's a beautiful cover.
I think it's fantastic. It's got the Taj Mahal in the background. It's got all these spiritual masters, and it's got the Beatles and their girlfriends, and then it's got the Indian musicians. And it's a nod to Sgt. Pepper. It looks like the Sgt. Pepper album, but only a spiritual version of the Sgt. Pepper album with all the spiritual people in them. And it's got Lakshmi in the front, who's the goddess of wealth, and she's also front and center on Sgt. Pepper. So this is a total nod to the Sgt. Pepper cover.
Gotcha. It reminds me a little. It is beautiful. I wondered if that was your work or not. It reminds me a little bit of when somebody had a birthday party or a birthday, and I guess it was Mia Farrow, I think, that had the birthday. That she was sitting with a crown on her head and everything, and
yeah.
Apparently she felt rather stupid.
Yeah.
But, his way of life was so much simpler than everybody else's that what gave him pleasure, people kind of looked upon as, isn't that kind of childish? And
yeah.
I think while a brilliant man and obviously a channel on some level for great wisdom, that there was a childness quality to him that was quite, I guess, endearing. I guess it's a better way to put it.
Absolutely. That's a good way to put it, yeah. Very endearing. He was very childlike, and he had this amazing vibration. When you were around him, you felt these waves of, I shouldn't say you, I should say I. When I was around him, I felt these waves of bliss coming from him, waves of love. He had this amazing love vibration, and so you wanted to get near him all the time. So those of us who were on staff, we were also always competing fiercely with each other to try to get into his room and get close to him, because I was addicted to this kind of divine love vibration that he was spreading, that you could receive by osmosis, basically. It was very compelling and very enticing, and you could just feel this charismatic energy. It was more than charisma, though. It was bliss. You could feel waves of bliss coming from him. It's very powerful.
Do you think in a way it was the same kind of energy a baby or a child has before they learn about how rough life can be?
Yeah, in a way it is. It's childlike, yes. Innocent.
That same innocence and purity that we lose as the older we get, the more protective we become of ourselves and our inner qualities. And I think that's what most children are like. And then they're taught to be protective and secretive and everything. And out of curiosity, I don't know that much about his life before his celebrity. How did he grow up? I mean, was he a kid on the street? Was he trained to become a yogi, or is this something he fell into? I mean, we see him as a master. I mean, I know a little bit about the Hare Krishna guru because I read his book. But how about Maharishi's? I mean, what was his childhood like? I mean, you must know some of his background before he became famous. So
he was, I think, a ordinary kind of Indian guy, and grew up in certainly not a rich family. He grew up in a hut somewhere, small place. And he always tells the story of when he met his guru, how that changed him. He was in college probably. He was in school. And during breaks in school, sometimes his uncle would take him to visit spiritual masters. So this time they went and visited Brahmananda Saraswati, and they managed to somehow get in the door and go upstairs onto the top of the roof where he was holding audience. And so they were there, and it was all dark, and they couldn't see him. And then all of a sudden, a car headlights passed down the road, and the kind of flash of light came onto the face of this great saint, Brahmananda Saraswati. And Maharishi immediately when he saw that face, he just surrendered. He just melted. And then later that evening, he asked him if he could become his disciple. And he was told that he should go back and finish college and then come to him. So he did. He went back and finished college, and then he went to the ashram of Brahmananda Saraswati. He was a very famous saint in India. He was one of the 4 main leaders of the Hindu religion. There's one east, west, north, south. They're called Shankaracharyas. And each of them is invested with leading the Hindu religion for that quarter of the Indian population. So his was in the north, and that's where he went to study with him in Jyotirmat, which is in the Himalayas. And also he had a summer residence in Allahabad, and that's where Maharishi studied with him, and he became his secretary. He was doing financial things for him and that sort of thing. Correspondence and financial matters is what he did. He worked for him.
But he became a kind of person you expect could walk on water.
He was. That term Maharishi was not an official title. Some of his disciples gave him that title, and it kind of stuck. He never, it isn't like anybody gave him a special dispensation of some kind or anything. And he was not, by the way, he wasn't a Brahmin. He was not of the highest caste, so he couldn't become a Swami in India. In order to become what they call a Swami and wear the orange robes, you have to be a Brahmin caste. And Maharishi was not a Brahmin caste. He was a lower caste person. He was of the I forget the name of the caste. It's people who are in business.
Okay.
That's the caste. It's not warriors. It's not learned people. It's not untouchables. It's not servants. It's a caste for people who are in business. They are like merchant class.
Well,
that's why he always wore the white robes rather than the orange robes. It's because he couldn't be initiated as a Swami. Swami is someone from the Shankaracharya order, which he couldn't be. He wasn't the right caste.
So his title though was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and
his title was Maharishi. His Maharishi was a title that one of his disciples conferred upon him, and Mahesh was his family name. Mahesh is his family name, and Yogi is just yogi. He's a yogi. In other words, he's someone who has accomplished yoga. Yoga means union of the individual spirit with universal spirit. But yoga.
So
means yoga.
So what did those who were studying with him call him?
Maharishi.
Okay.
We address him. We say Maharishi. Say Maharishi. May I ask you a question?
Wow. It's a whole nother culture. It's a whole nother way of studying. Now, you studied with him to become a teacher of TM.
That's correct. I studied.
Were the Beatles doing the same thing? Were they studying with him to become teachers?
Okay, so when they arrived in India, somebody I know, a fellow I know, asked George, "So are you going to become teachers?" And George said, "Well, maybe we might become teachers." So they went there to study with Maharishi. They didn't really go there to become TM teachers because they weren't experienced enough. They had only just learned transcendental meditation a few months before. They had learned TM in August of 1967, and then they went to India in February of 1968. So it was only a few months after they first learned TM that they ended up in India with Maharishi. And that's because Maharishi invited them to come to India. They were going to come right after they learned, actually. But because Brian Epstein died on August 27th of 1967, they were floundering about without a manager, trying to figure out what the heck to do with themselves. Paul sort of took a leadership role and got them involved with his project, which was Magical Mystery Tour. He conceived of this film that he wanted to make. And so he got the other Beatles involved with that, and he was afraid that if he didn't do that and didn't do that quickly, that their band would break up because they had no direction to go in. So Paul was always the business-minded one, and he kept the band together, basically. In fact, he kept them together for much longer than probably would have happened if he hadn't been so trying so hard to keep them together. So they worked on that project, and then when they were finished with that, then they went to India later in 1968.
So when you say they were studying with him, is that sort of, I mean, it's not like grade school and junior high and high school and stuff like that. Is it a matter of just studying spirituality? What were they studying?
Okay. So they were there, like I said, Ringo was there for about a week, and Paul was there for about a month, and John and George were there for 2 months. And they were following the same program as all the people that were there. And what they were doing is they were meditating, and the meditations were getting longer and longer and longer as they stayed there longer. And John and George got up to 8 hours a day in meditation. They got up to that many hours. And they were competing with each other to, who's going to meditate the longest, who's going to get cosmic, who's going to get cosmic meaning, get into cosmic consciousness, who's going to do it first, who's going to meditate more. So they were competing. And also they were going to lectures with Maharishi. So Maharishi would give lectures twice a day. And then once there was more meditation and less lecturing, Maharishi only gave lectures once a day. And then for a few days, right in the deepest part of the long meditation program, they went into meditation and they didn't leave their rooms. So what they would do is they would leave a menu outside the door every day as to they would tick off on the menu what exactly they wanted for lunch or dinner, whatever. And then the meals would be delivered to their doors. So during that long, long meditation period, that's when John wrote the songs I'm So Tired and Your Blues, because he was meditating all the time and he was becoming suicidal from meditating so much. And also he was so tired because he couldn't sleep at night. He was getting so much deep meditation that it was hard to sleep at night. And that was true on these long meditation courses that we used to go on. We would become so refreshed from meditating so much all day that we couldn't sleep at night. So I'm So Tired, which John Lennon wrote, was about that. And Your Blues was about him becoming suicidal during that period.
Wow. So the purpose of all of this is to meet God, to get to nirvana?
To reach higher states of consciousness, to experience samadhi. Samadhi means evenness of mind, stillness of body.
Okay. Now, you travel around the country teaching meditation. Partially. I mean, I know that's something you do. What kind of meditation is it that you teach?
All right, so I don't teach TM anymore. I was a TM teacher from 1970 till 1989, and then I started teaching a different form of meditation because I like this other form of meditation better. So I teach another method that's called Divine Revelation, and that so I don't teach TM or Transcendental Meditation, but I do recommend it. It's a very good meditation practice, and anyone can learn it, and anyone can do it, and it's very easy to do. Just a matter of sitting down and getting comfortable and closing your eyes and using the mantra. So it's very simple. It's a very simple practice, and it works. It's really very effective. I mean, I only had fantastic experiences with Transcendental Meditation personally. That's why I became a TM teacher. And but then I haven't done it for quite a while. I like this other method better.
Well, it's just, to me, and it's something that I do talk a lot about because, I mean, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people on the radio, and for every person who is in some form of spiritual teaching or sharing or whatever, everybody without fail suggests that if you're really on this journey, that you need to be able to meditate. You need a form of meditation of some sort. You need to have a routine of meditation in order to get to where you need to be. And it's always phenomenal to me. I mean, even people that are just, and I shouldn't say just, even people who are just who are extremely creative, even they say the best way to trigger that creativity, to open that portal of the flow of energy, is to meditate. And people that you wouldn't expect to say meditate, they all do.
I would agree with all those people. Meditation, I personally am a big fan of meditation. I believe meditation is the panacea of all ills. I believe that it's the answer to all problems. And
I think the thing that to so many people don't realize that for me, and I can only speak for me, but for me, meditation is listening, not talking, but listening. And
yes, that's my definition also of meditation would be to get quiet, get into a state of deep relaxation and peace, and to listen to the still small voice within, if you wish, or to receive divine messages, healing, wisdom, and inspiration from within yourself. So it's a receptive kind of attitude. It's a receptive mode. In meditation, and then prayer is different. Prayer is the opposite. Prayer is where you're speaking, manifesting, speaking things into existence, speaking the word, speaking affirmation, speaking the truth. That's for manifestation.
Well, so the Hare Krishna, the chanting, is not listening. It's speaking. So there is a difference between the two forms. So I think that there's and merit to both, absolutely.
Yes, I agree.
And I think that's one of the things that helped the Beatles. I mean, certainly they were all very creative before they even went over there, but I think that just opened up portals of all sorts of magic for them, and they utilized so many different forms of expression in the music. I mean, certainly the Indian instruments, but they went above and beyond too. They would bring full orchestras in, and they would do all sorts of different things with their music that that most other singers did not do. Everybody kind of stuck to their own genre, but they didn't have a genre.
That's very true. And they were very receptive to George Martin's ideas, and he was a great creative genius when it came to creating music.
I mean, the story of them and their journey is such an amazing story, and you tell it so beautifully in your book. It's amazing. I was, I've always been impressed by the stuff that you did, but yeah, even more so now. So
thank you.
So what is raga rock?
Well, raga rock is really rock music that's influenced by India. And many people think that the Beatles invented raga rock, but in fact they did not. They did not invent raga rock. It was invented by Davy Graham, who was a Rajneesh devotee, Osho, otherwise known as Rajneesh. Davy Graham, he combined jazz and folk and blues and Indian ragas, and he pioneered this special kind of tuning called D-A-D-G-A-D. And he arranged, in 1963, he arranged a traditional Irish folk song, which was called She Moves Through the Fair, as a guitar raga. And then Jimmy Page plagiarized it, note for note. Unbelievable that he just plagiarized the whole damn thing without changing anything. And he called it White Summer. And he failed to credit Davy Graham. And also the Yardbirds, they featured a sitar in an unreleased demo that they did in February 1965. Is called Heart Full of Soul. And it had a sitar on it. And then in June of 1965, Jeff Beck, who was one of the Yardbirds, he imitated that sitar part using a fuzz box on his guitar. And then the song became a hit.
Wow.
So that song, Heart Full of Soul, was really the first rock song to ever have a sitar on it, but unfortunately it was just a demo. Then in the Kinks single, See My Friend, Dave Davies, his guitar replicated an Indian drone sound. And the Kinks got that drone sound because they stopped in India in December 1964, and they heard chanting on the beach. So they tried to make something that sounded like that. So surprisingly, the birth of raga rock should not be attributed to the Beatles. It should be attributed to Davy Graham primarily, and also the Yardbirds and the Kinks.
Wow. Well, I think one other thing, too, you've spoken often about people being on the roof at night, and is that common in India? Is it because it's so hot that that's where the coolest air is? Is because you notice a lot of the houses have those those flat roofs so that you can go up there, and I'm sure it's not for barbecuing. So, don't people, sometimes sleep on their roofs because it's so much cooler?
Yeah, I think you'll find people sleeping on the roofs. You'll find them sleeping in the streets. You'll find them sleeping anywhere in India. They sleep out on cots outdoors. And but in Rishikesh and Maharishi's ashram, there were steps that led up to the roofs of the buildings. So on Maharishi's bungalow roof, Maharishi often met the Beatles on the roof of his bungalow, and he met us too when we stayed after. There was only a handful of us who stayed after the course. The course was 3 months, first 3 months in 1970. And then we stayed on, and he would meet us up there on the roof at night under the moon. It's just a nice atmosphere. It's a kind of romantic kind of place. And the Beatles, their own bungalow that they stayed in, there were steps that went up to their roof. So they chose that as a spot where they would compose music and hung out up there. And you see lots of photos of them up on the roof. In India, there's a lot of photos. And a lot of those photos are in this book, The Inner Light. Like I said, there's 170 very rare photos in this book.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, even the ones that I saw I thought were fabulous. Did it cost money to stay at the ashram?
Yeah, I mean, their course was, you had to pay to go on the course. I believe the course I went on, it was $200 or $250 or something like that to take the course. However, Maharishi didn't charge the Beatles a dime, ever. They went on the course in Bangor, North Wales in August of 1967 and never paid Maharishi one penny. And they went to the course in India in 1968, and they were guests of Maharishi. They never paid a penny for that. And that's a quote from Ringo. Ringo Starr said they never paid Maharishi a penny for anything.
But didn't that help to attract other people, too? I mean, wasn't it sort of a promotional thing? You know, I studied with the same Maharishi that the Beatles did. So I'm sure that you know, just from their celebrity and the stars that you know followed as well, that you know there were droves of people that signed up just to be able to be in the same atmosphere that all these famous people were.
They still are. People are still visiting Rishikesh to this day. They're going to visit the hallowed halls of the ruins that are left over there. Buildings that are falling down, they're still over there. Yeah, people are going there.
Yeah, I thought there was a picture. I think there was actually a picture in the book that I saw that looked so empty.
Yeah.
And I guess primitive is a better word too.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's sort of like the kind of place you would expect there to be a spiritual essence there, a place to get in touch with. You know, no telephones, no radios, no TVs, just peace. I mean, that's hard to find these days. It's really hard to find. And quiet. I mean, to really be able to be at peace where it's quiet is a difficult thing to find anywhere these days. There's always a buzz of some sort. There's always an airplane flying over. There's always a cell phone ringing. And to be in that kind of an atmosphere must have been magical. I have ringing in my ears. I have ever since I can't remember when I didn't have it. And a chiropractor once was adjusting my neck, and I said, "Stop." And, you know, he said, "What did I do wrong?" I said, "Nothing. It's just I don't have the ringing in my ears, and I'm hearing silence. And I haven't heard silence in so long. It was amazing." And I said, "Whatever you did," you know. And he said, "I don't know what I did." And I never heard the silence. And I keep hearing, you know, the sound of silence. I can only remember hearing it once. And it was amazing. So, silence is precious. But if the ringing went away, I would really feel like I was lost. That you know, what did I do wrong? I lost my ringing. I'm very used to it. It doesn't bother me.
I can't believe I'm giggling at that. That's really not funny at all. But yeah.
No, it's true. And a part of me thinks the ringing may be partially due to a spiritual opening that I had, and if I close that door, I don't want to close out, you know, what I get from spirit. So I'm keeping the ringing. I just noticed how close we are to the end of the show. I want give out your information, where they can find you, how they can find you, where you're going to be, that kind of information.
Okay. So I have a website, drsusan.org, drsusan.org, And that's my main website. I also have another important website, which is divinetravels.com. That's DIVINETRAVELS. That's plural on the travels, divinetravels.com. And the new book that we've been discussing tonight is called The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles. And you can purchase that anywhere that you buy books. You can get it on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, on Target, on any place online where you buy books, or your local bookseller. And I always recommend people go to their local booksellers so that you're supporting local businesses in your area.
Uh-huh.
So support your local business and ask your local bookstore to get the book, The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles. And like I said, it's an amazing book. It's got 512 pages. It's like an encyclopedia of the Beatles and their relationship with India. It's got 950 endnotes, 130 QR codes, 170 rare photos. It is a fabulous book, if I say so myself. It's told through the songs. Each chapter is a different song, and it'll tell you all that you ever wanted to know about the Beatles, the real meanings of these songs that the Beatles wrote, and what they were really trying to convey with these songs that people just don't even know what the story is. I mean, I talked about a couple of them here. Talked about Dear Prudence. I talked about continuing story of Bungalow Bill and a couple other ones, but you can find out about dozens of these songs and what their real meanings are in this book. It's a very entertaining book, very easy to read. People have just been praising it. So I think people really like it. It has a beautiful cover, too. The Inner Light, How India Influenced the Beatles.
And, I have to add my endorsement. It really is a magical book, and it does take you back. If you were my age, it takes you back, and it introduces you to an amazing time in life. If you're younger, you miss something special for sure. But I found it intriguing. I could not put it down. I usually set aside a certain amount of time every day to read because I have to read a book a week. And I found myself just going way beyond my whatever I had set because it was so interesting. And I want to thank you so much for writing it and for being with us tonight to share it with everybody.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the book, and it makes me very happy.
Oh, I loved the book. And we'll try to get you back on again. I know you've got, a dozen or so books. That, we'll find another one that we can talk about. I had you on, we did one on, I think, meditation or prosperity meditation.
Prosperity meditations. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we'll find another book and get you back.
Awesome. I've got 20.
I know. So thanks again, and I will be talking to you. And everybody, thank you for being with us and listening. Please check the book out. It is really, you have never had a book in your hands like this before, I promise you. And it's precious, it's amazing, and she's done a beautiful job. So thank you for being here, and I will see you all, hear you all. I'll be talking to you next week. Take care now, and good night.